I was fascinated with the prospect of being able to bring to the youth market what I've spent my entire career delivering to adults and professional athletes. As Jim mentioned, years ago, I'll date myself, I started as a personal trainer in the early 1980s in Manhattan when personal training truly didn't exist. There were 2 places in all of Manhattan. So that brought to my door a very interesting clientele, as you can imagine, because, you know, New York's an exotic place, and this was a service being sought out by some very fascinating people. And why I tie it in with the youth market is because I learned early on that everybody deserves the best of the best. And my clientele was very, very demanding. And it became clear early on that height and weight, as far as measurable metrics, were not enough. Because whether it's a male, female, young, old athlete or not, if you're training hard, eating properly, doing all of these right things, and yet you're reliant on the scale, more often than not, you're going to end up banging your head against the wall. And that's something I saw time and time again with the people I've worked with, whether they were in a sport that involved weight categories or not. So I became very cognizant of the importance of the scale is, to me, truthfully meaningless. What is important is what constitutes that weight. So I became semi-obsessed with body composition analysis so that you could really show someone not just the progress they're making, but also have a heightened conversation with them about the importance of lifestyle, nutritional practices, and training, kind of integrating everything holistically. And that fits hand in glove what Jim mentioned earlier about our holistic approach as a team. There's so much information, as you guys know now, regarding nutritional practices and training practices and recuperative practices, that these kids are being inundated with all sorts of information, and unfortunately a lot of it is at best confusing. So what we've really morphed into is an educational company where this process, our body composition, technically takes less than 5 minutes per individual, the actual technical application of it. It's completely non-invasive, totally safe, and it's very, very efficient. What takes time is explaining the results to you or your athletes or your kids. And that's what we pride ourselves on. That's where my background has proven to be such a strength, where it's not, here it is, figure it out. Because again, to compare it with the other forms of technology out there, like the bod pod, which is highly regarded, and I think the world of it, but ultimately when you're done with that process, it tells you one thing: what your percent body fat is. And I want to elevate this conversation so that everybody doesn't just think of this as a fat test. Because through it, we can start to educate kids about proper nutritional habits, proper training habits, proper recuperation habits. We work with a lot of physical therapists as well. Because ultimately what this analysis will tell you, if you look at the top section, the body composition analysis box, our bodies are ultimately made up of 4 primary components: water, protein, minerals, and body fat mass. Via quantitative analysis, accurate to 1/10 of a pound, we can tell each person what they're made of. I need their height and weight to reverse engineer these values of importance, because then we can systematically track your athletes or your children and monitor their development in such a way that now it goes even, it's as specific as the development of your trunk, your right arm versus your left arm, your right leg versus your left leg. Because something we've also found with athletes of all levels is that the men and women who were getting hurt most often were those that had the greatest imbalances between the right and left sides of their bodies. Like golf actually served to be a great example in that realm. And that, as you all understand, that's a predominantly one-sided sport. And when we started to do research and analysis on the men and women that were missing the most time on the tour, they were the most imbalanced. So it wasn't that we were trying to create a culture of bodybuilders or fitness devotees specific to this sport, but we wanted to help them perform. So that has trickled down to this level that we take great, great pride in, because I want to deliver to the masses something that had previously been the domain of just professional athletes. We work with athletes spanning the NFL, the NHL, the NBA, and Major League Baseball, multiple teams. There are 12 NFL teams that now trust us. This technology is deployed by NASA, the CIA, the FBI, Johns Hopkins Medicine, and the Mayo Clinic. And I mention those entities not to be a name dropper, but because we keep association with some very forward-thinking people. And I readily admit to you guys, as I have always our team, if some form of technology comes out tomorrow that is better, that's what we'll have. I don't work for the technological manufacturer. I collaborate with them because they really appreciate having me in the trench, if you would, being able to share this information, especially with kids, because this is a whole new world. Like the sheet that's before you, now granted, this is a 19-year-old male, but all the American Medical Association and the World Health Organization presently have is metrics specific to gender and height. That's it. So if you flip over that sheet on the back, something that I've worked over the last couple of years since our launch in doing, and this is across the country, is developing norms, if you would, for high school athletes, male and female. I mean, what you're looking at is kind of the sweet spot, if you would. Obviously, there are athletes above and below. And that back page I point out is also conceptually very important to me and my company, because we're trying to flip the conversation from percent body fat to lean body mass, which I get it. It's instead of saying you're 10% body fat, you're 90% lean body mass. And that's really important for us to have this conversation with kids, because again, we're trying to push them in a more optimistic, positive thinking light. It's not fat, fat, fat. Fat is important. We need it in our diet. It has to be a part of who we are. You know, for a male, the essential level is 3 to 5%. So when that guy tells me, hey, I'm going to get to 0, I go, well, I don't advise that because you'll be dead. And with females, it's a little higher because of reproductive and hormonal reasons. So again, we found this to be a very advantageous, proactive conversation. Typically, it comes up the point with athletes, a gal will go, Scott, I'm overweight. I mean, Alicia sits next to me in algebra, and she's 90 pounds. Why am I 130? You're 130 because we're going to show you why you're 130 pounds. And so much of that weight on that female athlete is skeletal muscle mass. And that's a good thing. That's the concrete, if you would, that supports the steel that is our bones. And then I can also tie that into the more skeletal muscle mass you have. You'll see about 3/4 of the way down in the right-hand column of that analysis, there's the basal metabolic rate, which is how many calories that athlete is going to consume at rest over a 24-hour period. So then that opens the door to best nutritional practices. So ultimately what it comes down to is inner image. A kid that I was talking to this week in Texas, ironically, summed it up real well. He's like, oh, Coach Scott, you're like the blue dot. I go, what does that mean? He goes, well, you know, the blue dot, Google, it's kind of, this is where I am. And that's what you're providing. You're showing me where I am. And then through the conversation and collaboration with both our team and coaches and parents, we can chart the course of what's in that athlete's or student's best interest. Because I can make a strong argument the kid that's going to be best served by what we do is the non-athlete. Athletes, I've used it, if you would, as our entry into this platform because they've always been forward-thinking with regard to body composition analysis. But we found it to be so powerful with student bodies as a whole that now we work with some school districts because it's such an important conversation to get kids away from the scale head and have them understand what counts is what you are made of.